So I'm out here by the nativity scene that some of the members of this church built years ago, and I heard some of the men talking this year. They said it's starting to look a little rough, and that's our word for today, the Advent word, rough. And we talk about the rough places being smooth. Personally, I kind of like it looking a little rough. You know, the manger that Jesus would have been laid in would have been rough-hewn stone. Not exactly the most comfortable thing for a baby. The roughness reminds us of the hardships of life. It reminds us of the reason we had to develop those rough exteriors to protect ourselves in the first place. Just like the trees and the bark that protect them from the elements of the world. So we've developed these rough exteriors, sometimes so rough that we turn other people away, and obviously that's never a good thing. Obviously there are places in our lives that God needs to smooth out, that He needs to grind down, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow, that smoothing process. But we can't appreciate what it takes for God to smooth out those rough edges until we recognize and accept their purpose, that they do serve a purpose in this life, that they do remind us of the life we've lived, of the pain we've experienced, of the shame that we hide under those rough exteriors. And it is a process to peel it away, layer by layer. And it's not a process we can do ourselves. I love those stories in the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. There's one specifically about a boy named Eustace. He was a greedy, selfish kid, full of sin in his life. And in the story, his sin manifested itself in the form of these rough dragon scales. And once he realizes it, he wants to get rid of it. He wants to shed himself of it. But he keeps ripping away at the scales, and they keep coming back. He can't do it himself. Until finally Aslan, the lion, who represents the Son of God, comes and says, I have to peel them off for you. And it's even more painful than when Eustace had just scratched at his own scales. Aslan digs deep under layers upon layers upon layers of these rough scales that have built up in his life. Eustace didn't even realize how deep the layers had gone. And ultimately, Aslan peels all the scales away, and he's back to normal, and then Aslan gives him new clothes, fit for the kingdom. That's the story of our journey. That those layers, those rough layers, need to be peeled away, piece by piece. But in order to do that, we have to recognize why they're there. We have to appreciate the hardship that formed them. Sometimes we have to confess and repent of the places that we're trying to hide and cover up with those rough edges. And when those scales are torn off, when that outer edge flakes away, it's itchy, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. When it's completely ripped off, we're left vulnerable, just like Eustace was in the story. He was scared, he was uncomfortable, he was nervous, he felt vulnerable. Until he jumped in the water and felt the cool water on his skin for the first time in a long time. How refreshing, how cleansing. What a beautiful experience. And so yes, God wants to smooth out those rough places in our lives. But let's appreciate the fact that we didn't get to be who we are without them. Without those hardships, without that pain, without all of the things that caused us sometimes to become a little too calloused. In some cases, those rough surfaces are valuable, just like they are on the trees. but they're not eternal. As we see those rough edges, those rough places in our lives, let us look deeper into the ways that those hardships that formed that outer layer may have made us calloused towards the world, towards others, may have made us, as we say so often this time of year, to the point that we don't really care who we offend because we know we're right. It's not how Jesus taught us to live. We shouldn't be out to offend people. We shouldn't be out to bear those rough edges to protect ourselves. There's always going to be rough spots, but let's appreciate those rough spots in our lives, in our history, in our journey, the rough spots that are still yet to come, as a reminder of all that God has helped us overcome, of all of the paths that He has walked by our side, even through the roughest times. And help us to come to the place where we rest in His arms, where we no longer need that rough outer layer, where we can surrender ourselves and allow Him to peel it off, scale by scale, layer by layer, deeper than we even realized it went, that He would make the rough places smooth, and that we could be truly vulnerable and safe in His loving arms. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank You for the rough places that You have allowed us to grow as we face the hardships of this world and this life. They serve their purpose in protecting us, just like the animal skins that You made for Adam and Eve. It wasn't Your intent that they would need them, but You knew that they would, to protect themselves from the elements outside of the garden. But Lord, help us also to know that there will come a day when we no longer need them. That gradually, just as the rough edges are flaking off of this manger, this nativity, and so You are peeling off the scales over our hearts, over our eyes, upon our minds and bodies and souls. That You are making smooth the rough places. That You are preparing a place for us to be vulnerable, where we no longer need that outer coating of protection, where we can just be who You created us to be, fully known and fully loved. Thank You for Your grace through this process, Your grace in the rough spots of life, and Your grace that keeps us safe in the spots that have already peeled away. In Jesus' precious name we pray.